Thank you very much, Milton. And definitely, it's a shame, I must say, that there seem to be different kinds of human beings that we're talking about here. The G7 leaders, and indeed all world leaders, need to understand that, you know, when we talk about human rights, we're talking about universal rights, and we cannot have different standards applied to Africa and different standards applied to other parts of the world. We cannot see, you know, them rise up, look at human rights situations in Russia, in other places, more seriously than they are. The people of Uganda and indeed the people of many African countries have been crying out. But, you know, the response has been very slow. It has been, you know, here and there, it has not been as robust. It has not been as concrete. What we continue to see is messages from people like the Prime Minister of Britain at some point congratulating Museveni towards his swearing in and looking forward to a call with him. This is a man who, as we all know, has abducted people in the lead up to the election. We saw, you know, so many people killed, people brutalized. As we speak, many of our comrades are still in safe houses. And I'm sure everyone understands that when we say safe houses in the Ugandan context, we are talking about torture chambers. You know, just last week, we saw 32 of our people who had been kept under illegal detention for more than a month, being produced before a military court, denied legal access to the lawyers, denied to them, and also, you know, remanded to Chitaria prison. So that is a situation we're talking about. Nubian Lee, Eddie Mutwe, Dan Magic, and many of our people have been kept now at Chitaria for more than 6 months without trial. And I mean, what we see is the world continuing to look at Uganda as, as if it's business as usual. We've done activism, we've tried to raise voices, we've tried to talk about this, but it's a shame, I must say, and I would appeal to world leaders, especially the G7, to really, you know, for lack of a better word, it looks as though it's racist to try and look at, you know, one section of people as deserving of human rights and another group of people as not deserving of human rights. What we're talking about are leaders who continue to support the Ugandan state, who continue to give it military aid. You've just talked about the IMF, which is considering a request of a lot of money to Uganda. With all the corruption that goes on here, and you know, you look at the Transparency International and all other bodies which have, you know, showed the kind of corruption that goes on in this country. Uganda's own Auditor General every year releases damning reports about the corruption situation, and yet we continue to see these countries turning the other side as if nothing is happening in this country. So I would really appeal to them to stop, you know, assisting a regime of blood and national shame.
All right, so now, David, this is the other question then. In terms of if there is an international, if there's a foreign government considering not supporting the regime with finances, but at the same time, trying to balance in not harming regular Ugandan citizens who deserve support, what advice are you giving them? What type of supports would be recommendable and what should not be supported?
We have made it very clear that, first of all the support should not go through the government of Uganda. And we are glad and grateful for some institutions which you know, are giving aid directly, and including some US programs which go directly to the communities. Like USAID sometimes channels its support towards HIV directly to the health sector and not through the government of Uganda. So we are alive to the fact that, you know, there's a challenge, there's a balance to make. On one hand, even when the foreign aid is directed towards these, you know, independent or given directly to communities, then Museveni has enough money to, you know, spend on guns, to spend on ammunition, to spend on all these other things, crazy things that he does. But we don't want to affect the common people who are sometimes beneficiaries of this assistance. So we have made it clear that the support should not be extended to the government. And we know that a lot of money, for example, from America goes directly to the military here in Uganda. And we're saying that must and should stop, because be it the training, whatever is given to them in form of support, is used to repress the people of Uganda, and that should stop.
All right, so David, now in terms of the military support, it is clear that this regime has no respect for human rights, in fact, has been committing crimes against humanity, going on for 35 years now, and still getting the financial military support from the United States, including the training. Do you think, and would you say, the United States bears moral as well as legal responsibility for these atrocities being committed by the regime supported by the United States resources?
Definitely, they bear a moral responsibility. And I think it does not apply to the US only, it applies to all other countries which continue to hobnob with an outright dictatorship, a government which has no regard for human rights whatsoever. So I would certainly say they bear a moral responsibility, because, I mean, how on earth do you continue to work and to support a regime that has clearly showed you that they are not interested in human rights, and they will violate them with impunity? And you know, every once in a while they come up and say, to hell with the West. General Museveni has been on TV several times saying that. And on the other hand, they continue to work with these guys and to give them support, military aid, and all sorts of support. So certainly they bear a moral responsibility.
So in terms of, you know, in this country, change in the United States, which I'm very familiar with, and in many Western countries as well, change occurs after mass movements and mass protests. And I gave an example of the Black Lives Movement, for example, in the United States. And they tend to also gauge situations in other countries, including Uganda, by the level of mass protest that they see. They're not aware, in many cases, but some of course are, that in Uganda's situation, it is very different. The regime has not hesitated to shoot peaceful demonstrators with live bullets. And we saw that November 18, November 19, during the massacres when they protested the arrest of Bobby Wine. So given that type of paradox, or quandary rather, how can opposition, in fact, I hesitate to use the word opposition, and I'm going to ask you the next question about that, because people that won elections should not be referred to as opposition. But let's say, how can the people who are opposing the dictatorship communicate effectively while their hands are tied up in not being able to protest the way people in the West are used to observing and gauging the problems in other countries?
Yeah, first of all, we believe that the countries we're talking about, the Western countries, America, for example, through their embassy and indeed through all other channels, they're able to understand what goes on in Uganda. They know that although on our law books, Article 29 provides for a right to the citizens of Uganda to protest peacefully and unarmed, that in practice is not there. If you just go to the streets to protest, you'll be shot dead. And, you know, we've tried it, we've seen it. People have just tried to gather. If people gather to, you know, hold a demonstration, in 2 minutes, the military will come in and they will shoot people. And if you are lucky, I mean, like people who are trying to protest about the rigging of the elections and all that, majority of them have not even been brought to court 5-6 months later, from January 14th up to now. So, I mean, I believe that platforms like this and online protests like this is an important tool. I just hope that the policymakers in Washington, D.C., the policymakers in Europe and all other countries are watching, and I hope they will just not stop at watching, but take some form of action, because ultimately we need to see that they don't use the double standards. I mean, people in Uganda may not be able to assemble as much as the people in Myanmar and indeed in other countries, because of the situation here on ground. But I think these countries should and must understand the circumstances and the dynamics. In the lead up to the election, after November 18th and 19th, we saw a crackdown like has not been seen before in this country. Thousands of young people were abducted, most of them picked from their homes in the dead of the night and taken to, you know, safe houses, many of them kept away from their families. And General Museveni came out and took responsibility for this. And he clearly said on TV that SFC was holding some of them. These are his guards. And, so it's very clear what is going on here. And I think the West does not need to first wait for, thousands of people to gather in the streets of Kampala to be able to take action.
Okay, now also remind some of the G7 leaders in the clearest terms possible how NUP actually won the elections. Remind them. I think that's important because when people start referring to NUP as the opposition, they might sometimes end up forgetting that in fact you're referring to the party that won the elections. So remind them of some of the clearest evidence.
Well, we've made it very clear that we won the January 14th election, and it was, despite all the efforts to rig and do all sorts of things. Before even I talk about winning, I should talk about the level of violence. And I need to tell them that what we had was really not an election, because we had our agents everywhere across the country arrested. We sent in supervisors, including our diaspora team leader, Haman, and everyone who was just picked up as soon as he arrived in Lira to deliver voting materials. And all across the country, our supervisors and polling agents were taken away. The country, of course, was put in a total blackout. The internet was switched off. Not just social media, but the entire internet infrastructure in the country was switched off. Radios were intimidated and ordered what to produce and what not to talk about. And some of them who defied and tried to do live coverages of what was going on were actually closed down. And so you had a situation where I cannot even say that there was an election. But when we were able to gather as many DR forms as we possibly could, we could see that substantially the results were in our favor. And when we did our computation, we found that we won an election with 54.19%. But General Museveni, of course, using the Electoral Commission, which he appoints, and the entire system, which is in control of, could not declare us. But even, we won this election even despite all manner of rigging that took place across the country. In the western part of the country and the northern part of the country, there was literally no voting. And so soldiers had access to polling stations. They would go, take all these voting materials away, critique all ballot papers or get critiqued ballot papers, put them in the ballot boxes, and in the evening, declare that they had won. Most of our people were gathering the DR forms and to bring them to us. And if you see our computation, it did not include several DR forms which were confiscated, because some of the people who were gathering these DR forms on behalf of NUP were arrested. Of course, the DR forms were taken out from them. We wrote to the police and the military, asked them to give these forms back to us, which were entitled to by the law, and some of our requests went unanswered too. So that is the situation that transpired on January 14th.
Right, so
Comrade Milton, thank you so much for taking us through this really insightful and informative discussion. We always, as a ritual in respect of our fallen comrades, we always observe a minute of silence for them, which we do at 3 o'clock. Now that Honourable David Lewis has just completed speaking, I'd like to ask everyone who's joined in before we proceed with this very, very important conversation and interview to respect and stay silent for 1 minute starting now, so that we can bear the souls of those who have departed for the struggle that we continue to fight right now. The 1 minute starts now. Thank you so much. May their souls rest in eternal peace. Thank you so much, Comrade Milton and Comrade David. Back to you.
Thank you. All right, so I think we have about 3 more minutes allotted, so I'll make it quick and just 3 quick questions. I'm sure not only Ugandans in Uganda and in diaspora, but the international community also that may sympathize with the struggle and the victory of NUP, in fact, are thinking, what is next going forward? If the mission is to transition away from dictatorship and to unseat this military regime, what are some of the agenda items going forward? And can you address that briefly?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I'm really glad that we are honoring our comrades who are falling in these struggles. I continue to call upon you all comrades to pray for our friends. The gentleman whose t-shirt, who's on my picture now, is in hospital. It's called Achileo Chivumbi. He's also been part of the detainees at Chitaria, one of the political prisoners. In fact, he lost his father a few months back, and he was not able to go and even pay his last respects. And that speaks to the cost this whole persecution is having on our people. But of course, what we call upon the world, first of all, is not to legitimize an illegitimate regime, not to continue giving it assistance and propping it up in many ways, not to recognize it. And indeed, the US came out with a statement which clearly indicated that the election was not free and fair. And we do not want it to just be in rhetoric. We want to see it in action. We have also called for specific actions, and we are grateful for the sanctions, for the visa restrictions and that kind of thing. But we believe that more of this, we should see more of this. We want to see more sanctions under the Magnitsky Act, visa restrictions and asset freezes. Some of the people who are well known, who have been committing crimes against humanity, who have been abducting our people, who have been, clamping down, any sort of peaceful assembly. You remember very well when we tried to take a petition to the United Nations offices and the military came and completely crashed down on journalists and all other people who had gathered there. So we want to see the world taking strong action and indeed to make it clear that the rights which are applicable to other parts of the world, Europe and the West generally, must equally be applicable to Africans. So we want to see more action. We think the reason why General Museveni and indeed many dictators stay in power is because of the support, direct or indirect, which they receive from nations of the world. And so we want General Museveni and his illegitimate regime to be isolated so that the people of Uganda have an opportunity to speak and be heard, and therefore able to reclaim the victory which the people of Uganda gave to NUP and to their leader, Honorable Robert Chagulanyi.
All right, so our time is exhausted, so I'll just make this as the final question. In Romania in 1989, when the dictator Nicolae Ceausescu, who had committed gross human rights violations for many years, when he was being tried by the tribunal, they actually said not even his worst crimes was all the killings and the destruction of families that he did, but they said the worst crime he had committed was to kill hope in Romania. With NUP's really outstanding performance in the campaign and the massive support that people showed by coming out and then voting, do you think hope has been restored in Uganda? And you yourself, are you hopeful that change will happen, and preferably not 5 years from today, as the dictator would prefer? I'm sure he would prefer to continue with this illegitimate regime until the next election. So that's the question. Are you hopeful? And if you are, then tell us why you have hope. And that would be my final question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I must admit that there are days in the past when it all looked bleak. But we are reminded that, there have been worse dictators than Museveni. And, there are many recent examples on the African continent. People who seemed, unmovable, people who seemed, firm in their dictatorship. And, if you look at Gaddafi, look at Hussein Mubarak, al-Bashir, and all these other dictators who ravaged countries and caused incredible pain on the citizens. And indeed, the citizens in those countries, in some cases, lost hope. But I want to say that we are hopeful, we are optimistic. We know that the task ahead is really, really difficult, and it's you know, there are many times which are very depressing when you look at, when every day when you receive calls of who are abducted, more people are abducted, and then the dictator, after abducting some of them, tries to buy them and to pay them so that they begin working for him and that kind of thing. But I think we have every reason to hope, we have every reason to continue struggling until we see change in our country, because in any case, do we have any alternative? Because every day that General Museveni spends in power is more corruption, more poverty on our people, more repression, more human rights abuses, and all other such evils. So we have no option but to remain hopeful and to continue working for change in our country.
All right, thank you, David, very much. And we wish you the best in the resistance. And of course, we are committed in supporting the resistance as well. Thank you. Back to you, Nico.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Milton. Also, please stay around for the interview with Matthias and Puga. And David, I would like to ask you if you have a couple of minutes for a question from the audience.
Okay, maybe 2 more minutes, because like I said, I had another meeting coming up, but I can stay on and take 1 or 2 questions.
Okay, thank you so much. So first of all, there is a question by Linek. He is saying, thanks, Secretary General. My question is that let us be informed on any funding institution that is able to fund dictator Museveni, such that we storm it earlier before it approves their request. We use the Twitter army. We are ready to defend and fight against anyone trying to fund Museveni. In short, there are many Twitter volunteers available to support the struggle online. What do you think about that?
Certainly, you know, a lot of times we don't get this information, but when we get this information, we'll put it out there. And I really appreciate the people, the Ugandans on Twitter, and of course, the friends of Uganda who are continuing to push very hard on Twitter, on Facebook, and all other channels. And indeed, as and when we know that, you know, the international community is giving funds to Uganda, we'll make this information available. Of course, like I've said, we've been victims of a lot of cyber attacks. You notice that our official Twitter accounts were attacked by the government. The Facebook page was hacked into. Our website, the moment we started uploading evidence of voter fraud, of the fraud that happened during the election, our website was attacked and put down. So this is what we're talking about. But now we're trying to restore these sites, hopefully with more security features, and then we'll be able to share all this information with the world.
Yeah, by the way, it's really good that the NUP_UG account is online again. So let's use that in the struggle. And as you know, the diaspora have at this moment like 6 or 7 accounts. So maybe you can also ask our comrades with NUP_UG if they can connect to the diaspora accounts. I have one final question from Herbert. He is asking, what measure do you have put in place to accelerate the demand for our comrades in prison, and also demand that IMF and World Bank stops funding the Museveni regime?
Yeah. First of all, what we've tried to do, we've tried all legal avenues to try and get our people out of prison. Like I said, the tragedy is that even while we're trying to get the comrades out of prison, more are being sent there. Just last week, we had 32 more people being sent to prison, having been under illegal detention, and they appeared in court with clear marks of torture. Myself, other NUP leaders and lawyers were all prevented from going to court. Remember that myself, Honorable Chagulanyi, Joel Senyonyi, and other leaders are not allowed to visit these comrades in prison. We were banned because we came out and talked about the conditions in prison, and then the government said we are no longer going to be allowed to visit these people in prison. So this is the situation, but we've tried all legal avenues, including we went to the High Court. The High Court, you know, said this matter is before another court, a military court, and therefore we're not able to interfere. We went to the Constitutional Court. We've been waiting for a date. We've not been able to get one. We've gone to the General Court Martial, applied for bail, and continue to do that. So these are some of the efforts we're trying to put in place. But of course, we believe that we should even look at other international bodies, and that's why we filed a complaint with the ICC, why we've gone to the East African Court of Justice, and all other avenues, legal and otherwise, that we are trying to use. But we believe that legal avenues are not enough, and such a protest is a clear and important strategy in trying to get freedom for our people who are under illegal detention.
Okay, thank you so much for the time that you have created to talk to us. People in the chat are very happy that you joined, so thank you very much for all you're doing for the struggle.
Thank you very much.
I want to give it back to you, David.
Thank you so much, Nico, and thank you to our guest speaker for